Our
reaction
to
Sergio
Perez
leaving
Red
Bull.
Hello everybody and welcome back to the B1 podcast with Matt and Tommy. We are currently backstage just before our Manchester live show to essentially react to the groundbreaking news that is Sergio Perez leaving Red Bull, maybe leaving F1, we don't know. Lots to dive into, Tommy. We've spoken about him a lot over this year and this season, I think quite rightly because of his performances, but it's finally been announced because there was still a little bit of, is it going to happen or is he somehow going to dig his heels in?
Well, we did literally a podcast 4 or 5 months ago. Now you can see it back saying Perez is staying till the end of the year. And of course he did that now infamous tweet of I'm not leaving from the Wolf of Wall Street. But yeah, it has come to an end. We've been waiting for that news, haven't we, for a long time now. We're kind of, we've been doing our shows for the last week essentially and feeling like it's going to happen any moment. And now officially we know that he will not be there with Red Bull.
Exactly. They've agreed to part ways. We've had no news about who will be replacing him as of right now, as of recording. I'm sure whilst we're recording, we'll get news or we'll miss something. But I guess the first thing is we have to dive into our initial thoughts. As I kind of joked about in the start, it's not surprising that he's left Red Bull now. I think for the team, it's the right decision. But it's now what does the team do from here that, in my opinion, shows whether they've learnt from the last 3 drivers that have gone up against Max Verstappen and whether they've sort of decided to find a trend in why they've all essentially failed against Max Verstappen. Of course, Gasly's picked himself up, so has Albon. Whether Perez will continue in F1, we don't know. But from the Red Bull side, this next choice is very important, especially with the car seemingly falling away from being the fastest.
It is, absolutely. I mean, it's a shame that if this is the end of Perez's career, it's ended in this way. We said with Daniel Ricciardo as well, it seems could even be quite a similar situation where neither of them wanted to essentially say they're being announced, because there was all these rumours with Perez that they were very much allowing him to say that he was going to leave, and then there's been kind of a bit of contract disputes, and at the end of the day this needed to happen. His performances were nowhere near good enough, to say the least, and they absolutely had to get rid of him. His performances weren't good enough. Would have been nice for him maybe we'll never know the full reasons why, that he could have maybe just announced this before the final race of the season, so we could have had a goodbye and been a bit more of a kind of celebration or a thank you instead of just this random news dropping. But yeah, it's definitely the right decision to get rid of him, because it's been a truly awful season for him. Yeah, I think it shows that Perez didn't want to leave initially, because as you say, I think it would have been a nice thing to say, right, Perez is leaving at the end of the year and you can have a moment, and especially if this is Perez's last season. If I was a fan of Perez and someone that I'd adored and wanted, I'd want to know if that was his last race, similar to what I said with Daniel Ricciardo as well. So, but look, that's from the driver's perspective and them clearly not wanting to give up until the very last moment. But in my opinion, absolutely the right decision for Red Bull to move on from Perez. I think even maybe a season too late, to be honest with you. But here we are. So let's get into the first question from Matt Brown _10. Simply, what went wrong? Well, only Perez will probably fully know that, and hopefully he writes a book or something. That'll be quite fun to get an idea of exactly what it is like to be the Red Bull number 2 driver. It could be like a really sort of dramatic book title or something like the Poison Chalice or something like that, because that's what it's felt like for so many years now. As I mentioned with Gasly and of course Albon as well. It's not like we've seen since Ricciardo a driver thrive in any way in that second Red Bull seat. But it's clear, the sort of opinion that I have, and something that you see floating around amongst 1,000 other opinions and theories, is that I just believe Max Verstappen is able to extract something out of a car that is very unique, that is Adrian Newey built, and he can drive it in a way that other drivers can't. And I think it's as simple as that. I don't think Perez is a bad driver. He's shown that before joining Red Bull. He was so hyped before he joined the team. But now everyone's like, he's finished. Oh no, he's the worst driver ever. No, you
he's
watch
not.
Any podcast from 4 years ago, I think it was actually 4 years ago today he was announced, and you'll be listening to everyone on the podcast, including us at the time, going, Alex Albon needs to go. What on earth is he doing? Perez, there's no way he should be leaving Formula One. You know, he just won that unbelievable race in Sakir after he was basically last and won the race for Racing Point. And he was the man of the moment. And we were saying he absolutely needs to get into that team. And of course, at the time, they'd had Gasly and Albon, hadn't they? And Perez going in was a kind of, right, we've tried the youth of the Red Bull Junior Academy, as a fly is joining us for the podcast.
Fly wants to join the PR podcast.
And the kind of the youth of the academy, this is now our turn to get some experience in. And if anything, it's been even worse. You know, you started off all right. I think that there's definitely a debate of, well, was it just because the Red Bull was so much better and it's favoured him? Yeah, definitely. But then
also, I guess
it has got
better.
Worse and worse
and worse.
It has got a lot worse. He was never this bad in 2021, for example, or 2022.
Yeah, you take like a 20-second deficit to Max Verstappen, and that was like a kind of standard Grand Prix. Whereas now it's been worse than that.
Yeah, it's funny you say about that whole situation, because I know there's been this talk, and I think Alex Albon famously said it on a podcast that, you know, they don't favour Max. It's just a difficult car to drive, all this kind of stuff. I don't think you can deny now having 3 teams. I don't think it is literally a case of like, you know, people love to jump on like, oh, they're sabotaging. Like, there's no way they would do that. I think it is literally similar to what you say, that they are a one-driver team. Helmut Marko has said it himself. It's all about Max, and we'll get into later who potentially could replace Perez. Do they care that much? It's Max's team, and it will always be about Max Verstappen winning the World Championship. So the second driver is just someone that needs to do a decent job. Now, Perez has not done even that, which is why he's being dropped, but they will always defend, like, they will always build that car around Max if there's updates. If, you know, we saw at the start of 2023, Perez was there and could get the odd, you know, victory, but as soon as they upgraded the car, it elevated Max to the point where he was unbeatable, but in potentially in doing that, it's made Perez drop down the order. So that, you know, this is a team that will just focus solely on Max, and whoever comes in that team has to know that that is going to be the case.
Absolutely. Let's go to the next question from P1 Patreon member Rightis. So, is this the end for Checo in F1? I am not convinced. I think that he brings a lot to the sport. He's got such a passionate, loyal fan base. He has quite very lucrative sponsors, which is perhaps why he's kept the seat up until this point. So I feel like he would be a target for the likes of Cadillac or that kind of team that is looking for experience. And I don't think Perez is done. You know, he put that funny meme out, didn't he, about I'm not effing leaving, and it was from the Wolf of Wall Street. But yeah, I think that he will potentially get signed. As much as we've seen, you know, on the other side of the scale, we've seen a lot of young talent do very, very well. Perhaps there will be a mixture that Cadillac will look for, an experienced one and a younger one. Who knows? It's up to them. But I think Checo would, as much as, you know, the general public and people on social media think that he's the worst driver to ever exist, I don't think that would be the case if he was to go to a completely new team. I think he would be surprised by how revitalized he would be as well. Because as much as, you know, he wanted to dig his heels in, and I'm sat there going, are you even enjoying yourself anymore? Or have you just kind of got used to the fact that it's a struggle every weekend? I think that it would be amazing for him to go somewhere else. So, and I would also be fascinated to see if we see exactly the same trajectory as what we saw with Albon and with Gasly, more so, I would say. Yeah,
Gasly literally got demoted and then won a race for them, and then look how he's ended the season now. Albon last year was one of the top drivers of the season, and everyone kind of singing his praises. So whether Perez would do the same, we don't know. But I personally think it'd be a massive shame if this was the way for him to end his career. Like you say, he's got a massive fan base around the world. He is to say he's a hero in Mexico is an understatement. You know, we went to Circuit of the Americas recently, and you can see like his fans just like absolutely going crazy, even though he's there like in 11th while Max is winning the race. They're just like cheering him every single moment. And for me, I think that the saddest thing is, and why it's a shame that we've not had that kind of goodbye, if it is going to be goodbye or whatever, is I think the narrative would be very different behind it, because if we'd have had Abu Dhabi and he said like, right, I'm going, I think we would reflect more on, the moment that he helped Max win the championship in 2021 with, the Checo as a legend, him defending against Hamilton, the wins that he had, what he did at Racing Point. But instead, like you say, he's almost been like laughed out the sport, which I think is a big shame, because if you think he's not going to regret his time at Red Bull because he's won more races and stuff, but you just think like how different that has changed from when he was seemingly off the grid because Sebastian Vettel was joining Aston Martin, and there was this talk of like, how can you get rid of Perez? He's doing so well. And he was going to end that career on that massive high, not being able to get a seat, but ending that career on that huge high of victory. And now he might be ending his career on such a sad note.
Yeah, it would be a shame. And equally, I guess, if you're going to play devil's advocate, you also think that drivers have lost their seats and careers for much less
of course,
in terms of performances. So we'll see. We'll see what the teams decide that have free slots. Next question. Vabehav Plus asks, the only question that matters now, who is getting the second Red Bull seat? Well, most heavily rumoured is, of course, Liam Lawson. But no announcement, as we say, has been made, which I don't think is a Red Bull changing their mind. I think it's more a case of letting the Perez news sit, let him have his moment, Red Bull doing it out of respect, because I think that's clearly something that they've wanted to do, is allow Perez to do whatever he needs to do to kind of almost just do it as nicely as possible. So I reckon we get the news in the next few days, potentially. And I think it will be Liam Lawson. Whether that's the right decision, we will find out next year. But it does feel very much like it would be another case of what we've seen with the Red Bull number 2 driver, in my opinion. At least Yuki Tsunoda's had more time to embed himself in the team. I know he said after the Red Bull test that, it wasn't that hard to get around it. Yeah, all that sort of stuff. But the sensible option is Yuki Tsunoda. The more questionable one is Liam Lawson, because Lawson has done some brilliant moments and you think, okay, wow, he's got some potential, but he hasn't done it week in, week out every single time to think, yes, 100% him. And also he's shown his fiery personality there as well, and you do wonder, do they really want both of those, himself and Max Verstappen, together in a team? Like, on paper, that looks a little bit of a dangerous pick, but it depends if Lawson is anywhere near Verstappen's pace.
It does. I think, Yuki Tsunoda, we've mentioned many times that I feel like he definitely deserves a chance at Red Bull, but it very much is looking like that's not going to happen, and they're going to go for Lawson. I do think that, and I want to make sure that like this comes across the right way, is that I think, in my opinion, they should go for Yuki. But that just saying that I think Yuki should go doesn't mean I absolutely think Lawson shouldn't. He has done a decent job. We saw what he could do last year. I don't think he's been spectacular enough for them to go over Yuki Tsunoda, but I don't think that means that like Lawson, doesn't deserve it at all, and it's an absolutely terrible pick, and he's been terrible because he hasn't. I just think Yuki Tsunoda deserves it more with what he's done, and he's kind of got more experience under his belt as well. So I'd love to see Yuki go there, but it very much looks like it's going to be Lawson. But at the start of this podcast, we said like it doesn't really matter who they go for, because they don't need someone that's going to beat Max. They just need someone to pick up a lot more than Perez did, basically. Genuinely, if you think Perez in 2023 still had a very bad season at the end of the year, but that was enough, because he finished second in the championship, won the constructors. Of course, the car was a lot better then, but yeah, it just needs to be someone more consistent. Genuinely, if Max is winning races or finishing second and third, you could kind of get away with being 5th, 6th every race. You just can't have that Perez where he's crashing, spinning behind the safety car. His best finish is like a 10th place or something. Just better than that, and I think he'll be fine in that, is probably what Red Bull wants, because they don't need to put necessarily the best driver alongside Max in, because that's never going to happen.
I still can't believe Carlos Sainz isn't the driver that Red Bull have gone for. I know they've tried to go more towards this development program and this kind of stuff, but then you also question, well, Yuki Tsunoda's been in the development program for a lot longer than Lawson has, and why has he not got the promotion? But Carlos Sainz just feels and felt like the perfect replacement if they are looking for a constructors fight as well as a drivers as well. Final question from P1 Patreon member BG Sean. How do you rate the Red Bull Driver Academy now compared to the other teams going forward?
I mean, the Red Bull Driver Academy is an absolute mess at the moment, in my opinion. It's quite clear that there's a power struggle between Helmut Marko and Christian Horner. Christian Horner wanted Sergio Perez to come in, and that kind of broke the norm of the young drivers coming in, if you like. That Red Bull Driver Academy, they were in an unbelievable... they almost had too many good drivers that they needed to promote, despite having the luxury of having two teams that no other kind of company or driver academy has that luxury of having essentially 4 seats in Formula One. And you go back to it being, Sebastian Vettel, Kvyat, Buemi, Da Costa, Verne, Daniel Ricciardo, all these drivers, and there literally wasn't even enough room for them. And then now we're kind of in a complete mess where they've put in someone very experienced, but it's not worked. Then, as you say with Liam Lawson, are they putting someone in far too early that we're going to have exactly the same situation where it's exactly the same as Gasly and Albon? So yeah, it's a mess. Is this now the kind of moment where they try to steady the ship and get back on track, and now Helmut's a bit more in charge, and it's going to be that if you do well at VCARB or Racing Bulls, as it's going to be next year, you work your way up, and then they see how Hadjar does, and then maybe he's the next one in charge. But it's a very dangerous game when Max Verstappen is kind of the be-all and end-all of that academy, and we know there's been a bit of politics going on at the start of the season for that, and if he goes, everything's going to crumble. They've lost Ricciardo as well. Like, it is quite the mess, and you can see that they're now kind of scrambling, going, oh, who do we put in? Because it's not a sure thing. You can't say that Lawson is good enough to deserve a place in, against the driver that won the World Championship. Not yet anyway. No. It is interesting because, of course, as you mentioned, the Red Bull Driver Academy did have a massive roster, and then it went to going outside of it because they didn't have enough talent, and it almost feels as though they're going full circle now, where they are almost trying to safeguard Max Verstappen leaving the team and then nurturing some talent within their sort of roster. But I just don't feel as though, because there's so many driver moves, and what we've seen is I don't feel like it's just purely on driver academies anymore, as much as Red Bull might try and lean towards that again. It really depends on how good Lawson will be if he is in that Red Bull second seat. But okay, that's it. We are done. We've rabbited on far too long. We've got a live show to go and do. So thank you, everybody. Tommy, what are your final thoughts? Final thoughts. Big shout out to the fly that joined us for this whole
Honestly,
podcast.
I wanted to... this fly just attacked me mid-podcast. It was really great. So yeah, big shout out. I can literally see it flying towards us again. So we're going to end the podcast there. See you very soon. Thank you as well if you've come to any of the P1 live shows. Final one tonight in Manchester. And take care.
Wait.
See you later. Bye.
Bye.